template. If you wanted to capture specific assessment or structured content within your referral, this might be a good option to publish and then have that information available to come through. Admission forms, general data entries, care plans, research, oncology, pathology, public reporting, insurance payments. So has anyone got other sorts of things that they'd like to use questionnaires for or forms? Always looking for more examples. Okay, not others. Hands up if you see stuff that you would use today on that list. Yeah, good. Not on those. So the typical workflow that I'm sort of seeing with questionnaires. Step one is we actually have to find the questionnaire definition. So what's the context we're going to be using this in, and therefore find the right one. So if it's a referral, maybe there's a definition in the directory that says for this particular service you need to use this template. Then we need to load and render that questionnaire in that context. So you'll have some form of rendering engine which goes and renders the content. We then might have the information in the questionnaire that says we want you to pre-populate this. So one of the questions is the patient's name, the gender and the date of birth. So it makes sense rather than having to have the user type that stuff in, go and pre-populate that out of a data source. So yes, we want that. Because it's all about making it quicker, easier and more efficient. That's the whole idea of atomised content. User enters the data. So during that process, you might get local validations happening, making sure, did they enter a valid date? Did they enter a numeric field with a numeric value? And then the user's finished, so we'll do a validation of that questionnaire response, which is the filled out data, and validate that on the server side when we try and post it. That could then serve up errors, warnings, issues, what's happened, is it all valid, and then report that back to the user. So they might say, you haven't entered the mandatory required fields, so please continue. Yep. Then it's saved back to the target server, which might then also extract that content into other resources. So if you were creating a questionnaire for an admission form, it might actually go and say, well, there wasn't a patient already, let's create the patient out of this. There was some observation data collected, so let's create actual observations out of it. So we can do that sort of a step. So any questions on that before I jump through?
The pre-population, do you mean that like loading data and putting it in the questionnaire resource, or attaching another resource to it?
So the question was, is when you do that pre-populate, and you expect that to be just grab another resource, say an observation, and then just attach it with it. So what I mean is actually pulling the values out of somewhere else in the system and actually putting the value in the atomised questionnaire response item. So in the patient name field, actually putting the name value in there. Yep. Cool. I'll go into a bit more detail. So the actual definition, so the two resources, which are the stars, questionnaire and questionnaire response. So primarily, questionnaire has a metadata section, which is the whole top section, which is about describing what it is, who wrote it, what version it is, when you should use it, the context, and then all the items, which are the actual questions that you're going to ask. It's a nested tree structure, and we have, the most important ones are text, what are we going to show the user to call it, the link ID, which is the binary value, primary key for the question to be able to relate the question to the answer. So you can do that interpretation. What type of question is it? Does it repeat? Some data validation rules, and then those formatting hints that I alluded to earlier. And so on the questionnaire response, we get the context. So if I was doing a practitioner survey, then I'd have the context in the questionnaire response. Subject would be practitioner/23. Get that. Then the items, which are an exact replication of what's in the questionnaire definition. And yes, the link IDs must match, and they have an answer value inside that. And one of the questions I get is, so the questionnaire definition is a nested structure, and I get people ask, well, can I just make the responses just a straight list of answers and not have the nesting? And the answer I say is no, make them exactly the same. You'll give yourself a whole lot of additional problems if you don't make the processing the same. So that way, as you walk through the response, you can walk through the questionnaire definition and exactly map out and say, okay, yes, I've met those needs. If I don't have the parents in your groups, then working out, have I stepped in the right one, it's going to get a whole lot more messy. So please keep them the same, including the nesting depth. I don't expect everyone to be able to see that up the back. So this is on there because the slides are all downloadable from the website. This stuff is from the spec page, but it's really all of the item types, and I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. So the first one is the group, which is, I guess, a collector of child questions. So it might be, if you just had sections in a large survey, you could join those up. If you had tabs, so if you wanted to represent a tab structure, you would use groups for that. If you just had a table definition, so you had tabular data that you wanted to enter, that's also a group. Displays, so in DSTU2, there was an extension for putting hints on places. With 3, it's just another display, which is a read-only field, which has no edit, so no answer required for it. Then all the other sort of control types. The 2 that I'll highlight is choice. So who's actually knows what the choice type is and what's good for? Yep.
Codes.
Codes, yep. So where can I pull those codes from? Anyone?
Other systems.
So you can pull them from code systems. So there's 3 places you can pull them from. So I've done all 3. You can either have them in line in the question. So there's an option. Actually, let's go and have a quick look at the spec and pray that my internet, yes, good. Do resources, alphabetical, questionnaire. Okay. So flick down to, so we had, so option. So we have this option value, which allows us to have those codings in line inside the questionnaire definition. So that's one option. The other one is to use this value set reference, so which will then point out to a terminology service. So if I'm sharing a set of options between lots of surveys, then the most sensible thing to do is create a value set and then reference that from the questionnaire. Much easier management, much easier dealing with it. What I used to do in DSTU2 when the value set was more simple is I actually contained it within the questionnaire. So that was another option. Okay, so we'll jump back.
Is that,
yep.
Is that not an option anymore with STU3?
You can still do it. The reason I've stopped doing it is with the split up between the value set and code system, it's now a whole lot more processing that's really annoying when you're just trying to deal with that in JavaScript. So technically I can still do it, and I think we've still got it implemented, but it's a lot more effort. And the only reason that you'd really want to do that is if you were sharing the same value set definition only within several questions on the form, and you didn't really want to share it externally. So that's the only real reason I can see for doing that. So choice and open choice. Open choice is the same as choice, except you can also have the free text. It's sort of like a combo box that you can still type the string in and have it not pick up a value coding out of it. Yep. That's cool. Another, I'll say it's a warning, or rather a suggestion. When you're binding value sets into a control, have a think about exactly how many rows are in that value set. If I'm going to bind a control and say, okay, give me everything out of SNOMED, that's going to be a really large number of radio buttons. So you might not want to do that and do something that's got a more intelligent finder or autocomplete or something. There's a whole ton of extensions. which are available for a lot of these data types. So you can do minimum lengths of strings, maximum lengths of strings, minimum numbers, maximum numbers, and that side of the content. So just going through, so what happened between DSTU2 and 3? So in DSTU2, we had groups and questions. In 3, we've got item. So we don't have that differentiation anymore. And how do we get a group then? It's just an item type. So that's quite simple. With DSTU2, there was a group at the root of the questionnaire. Now that doesn't exist, it's just a full set of items. So enable when, read only, max length, initial value, used to be extensions in DSTU2, now they're part of the core. So it makes it a lot easier to go and look through. Concept, which was sort of an identifier for a question, turned into code and definition. So it's sort of the same logical thing, but slightly different way to represent it. Labels used to be an extension, now it's item type display. So I'm doing that. There's more metadata at the root in STU3, and just on that I've put group question, child collection, ordering, ambiguous. Does anyone have any idea what that means? No? Good. Okay, so with DSTU2 you had a group could have a set of child questions. It could also have a set of child groups. So if I wanted to interleave groups and questions, there's no real way to say, do I put the groups first or do I put the questions first? And so I'd have to fabricate a way of mixing them by having more groups in there than I really wanted. So with the new structure with the item, I don't have that issue anymore. So I don't know, do I have to look at groups first, then questions? So it's a little bit cleaner. The one thing, so I always like to go back to the definition. And have people seen the R2 diff tab in the spec? Yeah? A couple? So it's a really good representation of what's been added or changed from the DSTU2 to 3. So we can see that some of these have been added, some of them were changed, their bindings, and you can see item was all added, but it was really a funny variation. So although that looks like everything's new and that stuff's deleted, it's really because group and question were sort of morphed into item. So it's a difficult representation to try and do with this R2 diff tab. So that's just a warning if you're looking at those as well. Questions on that? Excellent. So there's another section, or another implementation guide on top of the FHIR questionnaires, which is the structured data capture implementation guide. It covers data element registries, form managers and the responsibilities of those, and a fair amount on doing pre-population and a little bit about that extraction afterwards. Lloyd McKenzie was giving a talk on that, so I'm not really going to dive into details on that, but just know that they exist and the work that's going on there is being considered to come back into HL7 International, and we'll get more work done on that going forward. So, all the exciting stuff. So on to creating questionnaires. So I've gone through quite a few of these options to actually do this stuff. So we started off with the very first stuff and going, okay, this is a really great idea. We had a FHIR connectathon on the topic, and I thought, well, how am I going to actually do something here? I thought, do I start just hand coding some stuff, which is using the text editor, which we did a little bit, and I thought, well, I've got an existing forms editing solution, which is a part of our existing product. Why don't I just try converting that definition into a FHIR definition? No, that should be pretty straightforward. It's not quite a facade, it's more of a migration or a conversion activity. So we did that. And that actually works really, really clean. And I'll show you a demo of that from our stuff. You could have native editors. So we have, I guess, one of our developers decided, yes, we're creating these questionnaires, maybe we should have a tool to go and mess with, and so over about 2 nights he knocked one up, and that's what I've got to show there. It only supports DSTU2 at the moment, but we're working with a new React version of it that's STU3. Graham has an editor for it as well, and I'm sure that there's others out there that people are working for. So let's have a look at a quick demo. So this is a rendering of a questionnaire. So this particular one, this is always fun when you try to work with two hands. So I'm just going to grab, so the URL, I should have had this pre-worked out. So this is going straight to the, so this is going to open up the actual definition that's being rendered by that rendering. If the demo guides are with me. He holds his breath. There it is. So now if you can see the scroll bar at the side there, that's a pretty big questionnaire. So within this questionnaire, can you actually see that down the back there? That's all right? Yep. So I can see we've got the metadata. We've got, so this is a DSTU2 questionnaire, so it's not an STU3, but you sort of get the idea. So I can show that. So it's got a contained value set with those two options in it, because I'm sharing them. Another couple of those. I've then got a set of extensions, which I'm not going to go into right now, so I'll skip to the end and look at. So I've got a group here with an extension query, which I'll also skip for right now, and we'll come back to that later. So this section G is doctor details. There's a question, which is the provider name, doctor's name, type string, and yes, we require it. So if I go and have a look at my form, I've got a section A, section B, section C. And if I scroll all the way to the bottom, I've got this doctor's details area. And so I can see I've got the little red mandatory little indicator, which is about that rendering. So you get those sort of complexities in there. So another thing we'll look at, so if I scroll up a little bit, and I'll see, so I've got radios, which are a big section in there. So I've got medical specialist, so I can click on that, and you'll see that shows the enable when functionality. So when that particular checkbox is ticked, show that one. When that one's ticked, show that one. So that's pretty cool. You can also sort of do that with value sets. So if option A was selected, or option B, which is other, so you can show that little other text box at the bottom. So that's the sort of stuff you can do with that. One thing I'll try and do now is I'll click the save button on this form. It's going to say so there's that validation on the client side that stuff hasn't been done. And I wonder if I can actually do this. Commit, provider number. And you're wondering, is that actually going to go and save or not? Okay. So I now see I've got some additional details that are going on. It's actually saying that these properties needed to be filled in. So I've got conditional rules on the server side, which actually say under certain conditions, those ones need to be filled in as well. So it's that next stage of the validation. I'm wondering. Yep, so there's another example, either the progress review date or the medical next, so you can only do one of them, so there's one of those optional validations. Okay, so that's a little bit on the creation. So if I look at how about we do export, so this is a legacy application, obviously. Everyone loves legacy applications, we're full of them. So we'll have a look at the actual survey. Let's click, have a look. Okay, this is a pretty big form, so we've got a ton of schema in there with different questions. This column, you see that some of them have got a little value That's actually a code system binding, internal, and then this is the layout where you've got the questions. But it's a fairly simple, but there's a fair amount of data in there. So I've got a variety of combo boxes and what have you. So if I go click and I go publish, that'll whiz away in the background, and you'll see it start trying to publish stuff. So it's actually doing so for those at the back, that's the fiddler client, which is watching the network and actually seeing that, okay, this is publishing value sets from that definition, and eventually it'll get to the bottom and go, here's the questionnaire definition. So let's see if I can find where that is. And here's one I prepared earlier. So if I look at that, let's just refresh that so see it come up. It says hoping the network just holds stable. So we can see each of these groups. So it's still rendering that content in, and we've got a custom tag that says this is a set of tabs. So it knows to turn those groups into tabs, and so that's that same form with the actual data fields in there. So it's a pretty good representation from a legacy system into a new one. And like I was saying earlier, if you've got a large value set, don't put a drop down. Country of birth, 100, however many you want in there. So AUS, bam, goes and does the look ahead. Network's holding up. So Australia, English, actually make it culturally relevant to here. And that's the Australian version of the US race, or that type of thing. So I think I'll leave that there from that side. So from an editor perspective, so we knocked up that really quick editor. So we can go and drag questions on, groups, questions, booleans. That's the easy way to put that. It's way easier with two. Do preview. So you get the whole idea that it's pretty quick to turn around and get that content done. We can then click on it and say that's actually a set of tabs. Save, preview. You get the idea. So I won't go through that. It's not a demonstration of product. And of course, once you get forms that are getting bigger and bigger, good. Okay. So any questions on those before I jump through? Yep.
In the last section, you created a form with standard items and groups from the questionnaires. Is it also possible to make a selection of standard resources, so that you have patient name, that kind of stuff?
So there's no, so the spec doesn't have anything about creating a template, if that's the sort of thing. So I want to grab these 5 questions and say that's a patient block, and then I can drag and reuse that. That's something that you might do as a set of tooling that you might create yourself. But as part of the actual spec, we don't want to enforce that. That makes sense? Okay, so pre-population. So we can get that XML content. So the $populate spec, sort of, it doesn't define exactly how you do that. So it gives you a capacity to say with the $populate. Let's have a look at the spec page itself. So sorry, operations. So you have that $populate, and it just says it's your responsibility, which is kind of handy. However, it does say that you can pass it in to say, this is the questionnaire I want you to pre-populate. This is the context, so it's going in this subject. So I want it to be populated for this patient, and I want you to populate it with this content, which could be anything. So we've done some funky extensions around that, which I prefer. And if I have a look at that demonstration questionnaire I had, so if I look at the top here, I've got an extension which is a query. So when we receive a populate call for this questionnaire, I'm going to execute that expression on my server, which will give me a FHIR resource. So that's cool. And then if I look at my next question, I can look at this extension, which is called XPath, although it isn't. It's actually a FHIR path expression. It's going to read that content and then populate it into that field. So one important part here is I'm actually doing a concatenation or a string join between two different fields. So it's not a one-to-one mapping from the FHIR reference into the I'm using FHIR path to do a string manipulation. And because it's FHIR path, we can go and grab out the practitioner's telecoms system value phone. Actually, that doesn't look like the XPath version. So that might be the older cut of the form. So, which is a kind of really neat way of actually executing it. I've got a query definition. I use the smart on FHIR context to get out the practitioner and the subject if I'm not provided that in. So that's how we've done it. So now, conversion, mapping to other resources. So there is a definition property in there, so which is, going back to the spec. So look at it, there's a property called definition. So this definition property actually allows you to link to an element definition in a structure definition. So I can say that this question actually links to a practitioner structure definition, and within that, this particular property within that. So I can use that, and there's the definition, and the spec does have, so that 238.54 gives you the details on how you do that. But just to sort of show that in a little more detail, do I have that open? Yeah, so here's a questionnaire that I've set up. You see that down the back still? Yep. Excellent. So I've got an extension on the top that says, this whole questionnaire I want you to link up to this particular HCX practitioner structure definition. So that's yep, all right. So I'll come down to my first question, which is a group, and then I'll come down to my next item, which is a Boolean field, which is a checkbox, and it has a link ID of practitioner active, and the definition is now going to bind that to that structure definition, so with our practitioner, and the element practitioner active within that structure definition. So now when I go and have a look at that, I can create a routine which will run through these answers and pull those values out and populate an actual resource instance. People sort of get how I can do that? Now if I take one more step, it's kind of funky if you can get that part, I can then, because structure definitions can have extensions, so we can map it into an extension value. So that's pretty easy because they're static sort of. I can also bind it into a slice. So with the telecom, I can do a slicing on the website and I can bind against that. So we've got that covered. And the other one that gets really weird is if I've got a group of practitioner qualifications. So I can create a slice on that and choose that this group, so this is an item of type group, and I'm going to bind that up to the practitioner qualification. So when I get to this particular group is allowed to repeat. So every time it repeats, I'm going to create a new practitioner qualification. And within that, I've got the qualification code. And so I can then pre-populate that. So I can actually create a table or a repeating section of, actually this is even cooler. Test. Not having clicked this before he walked in. Is it going to? Should. Wake up. It's not going to behave. Okay. Well, I think you sort of get the idea about how we do that mapping. So if there's any questions on that mapping section? Seems like a pretty useful thing to be able to do. Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. Okay, so that's how we directly link those structures, and we can link each item, and even with those repeating groups. So we saw with that practitioner qualifications that we had that level in there. One more thing before I jump off that. So with those qualifications, I actually sliced a couple of community and clinical sections, and they happily would then fit within that. So you can then have some of the slices fill in, so you could have 3 certifications at the top level that weren't repeating, and then another table which had others for anyone else's stuff. And it would still bind nicely through that resource. So it's just a bit hard. So yep, perfect for extraction. That's exactly what I'm doing. The caveat is you can't do complex split join calculations. So you can't take one field that's doctor's name and then turn that into a first name, second name. It seems pretty obvious, but it's always worth saying. We created some custom operations to convert to resources and save atomic data for going in 2 directions. Don't know if they'll ever become standard, but there we go. So validation, there's sort of several layers of validation that go on. So we do the top level, is the FHIR XML JSON. Have we cut that? Yep. So core profile, have we met all the needs? So do we have a status on there? Or that level? Yep, tick that off. Then we're going to do questionnaire response validation, which then matches up, has the questionnaire, has the answer of the correct type according to the definition. So if it's an open choice, is it a value string or a value coding? Yes, no, 1 to 3. Then you might have extensions for those min-max values and custom validations, and all of this comes back to the user as an operation outcome. Cool. So I won't walk through the code. So one of the things that we've done as a non-standard extension is we've taken the concept of the invariants in the structure definitions and said that would be really cool if I can do that on a questionnaire. So we created an equivalent structure inside the questionnaire, which has the details, which is the bit of text that's going to show the user. We have the location, which is going to be the link ID of the question, and the severity, so it's an error or warning, and then the actual FHIR path expression, which will evaluate. So I can then check to say if I had a group with 3 dates in it, I can do a FHIR path expression that compares them all and says, yep, that's the right order, or no, it's not, record an error. Does that seem pretty cool? Yeah, I like it. Scoring, so we've done some other non-standard stuff. I wonder if that's even going to work. So you could do, that's the last demo. Smart Q, browse templates. Hoping that you can find it real quick. Scoring. This is a public server, it's a public site. If anyone wants to go and mess with it, go post questionnaires to there. Others have. It makes it very interesting when you go to a demo and someone's been messing with your questionnaires, but that's part of the joy. So we can have those sort of values. And as I tick through them, you can see that little total value at the bottom is changing. So that's each of these value set options has a specific weighted value. So it's not 0, 1, 2, 3, it's whatever the weighting is, and then that can be aggregated and shown, which is kind of a cool addition. So that's also not standard. So I guess as a summary, so I sort of went through creating the form definition, the validation rules, the mappings, how you can create that form data, sort of showed off a little bit of a demo, performing that validation, mapping, how it interacts with terminologies, and that advanced. So where do you want to use questionnaires? So any other questions? Yep.
How we can handle versions of questionnaires? Or if you just create a new version, you add a required field.
Yep. So the question was, how do you handle versioning of questionnaires and questionnaire responses? So good enough. So the reference from the questionnaire response back to the questionnaire, you can use the versioned reference, so that you can then say, well, even though there's a newer version of that questionnaire, that particular response was for the old version. So you can leverage that functionality. Otherwise, in our implementations, we actually just create a new definition of the questionnaire and then So rather than trying to use the same one and increment that, we create a clone of it and then modify that and attach when we're ready. So it doesn't break that version. Yep.
Yeah.
One more?
I see when you were showing the questions on the forms, what the user was seeing, the question that would change based on the answer to the previous question.
Yes.
I believe there was some logic going on there. Is that a part of the questionnaire resource, or was that something you could basically were contacting the server back and forth?
So that was a question. So what I showed there was when I ticked on one box, some other stuff happened. So that was using the enable when. So which is it's a part of the questionnaire definition to say when this value equals that, show this stuff.
Okay.
Or when it's not, hide it.
Okay. How and can I also do like complex logic with it, like AND or XOR, or just based on one value?
At the moment, it's based on one value, but you could potentially do multiple bindings of that, but we haven't implemented that. So
it's a part of the.
There is some level of it you could do, but yeah, have a look at it and see what makes sense. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.